In August 1944, the roads of northern France trembled under a sound that wasn't gunfire. It was the growl of engines, thousands of them, massive trucks roaring through mud and dust, carrying fuel, ammunition, and food. Men behind those wheels fought not with bullets, but with courage and exhaustion. They were part of an operation so critical that without them, the Allied advance across Europe would have died in its tracks. This was the Red Ball Express, the forgotten engine of victory. After the D-Day landings in June 1944, the Allied forces had broken through the German defenses in Normandy. Within weeks, American, British, and Canadian troops began pushing eastward at an astonishing pace. General George S. Patton's Third Army was moving faster than anyone had predicted. His tanks cut across France, driving deep into enemy territory. But there was one problem no one could ignore: fuel. A Sherman tank consumed nearly 1 gallon of gasoline every 2 miles. For every mile the army advanced, the supply lines stretched further from the beaches of Normandy, where ships were unloading fuel and ammunition. The faster Patton moved, the harder it became to feed his army. Trucks bogged down in mud, convoys delayed, bridges destroyed. The armored divisions were outrunning their own supply lines. One officer said, "Our tanks were lions, but they were starving lions." By mid-August, the Allied advance began to slow. Tanks stood idle for a lack of fuel. Soldiers waited for food. Ammunition stocks dwindled. The army that had stormed Normandy was now crawling. And the fear was real that this pause would give the Germans time to regroup, to strike back, to turn the tide. It was clear. Without a miracle of logistics, the entire invasion could fail. That miracle came in the form of trucks and men who were ready to drive them to the edge of exhaustion. General Eisenhower gave the order to create a non-stop truck convoy system to feed the front lines. The idea was radical. Thousands of trucks would move continuously from the beaches of Normandy to the advancing armies hundreds of kilometers inland. They would carry everything: food, ammunition, spare parts, and above all, fuel. They called it the Red Ball Express. The name came from American railroads, where Red Ball meant high-priority cargo that must move fast. The same principle applied here. Red Ball trucks had absolute right-of-way. If you saw a Red Ball convoy on the road, you got out of the way. Military police cleared paths, bridges, and villages. Roads were marked with red circles to guide the drivers. The system began on August 25, 1944. In just 36 hours, thousands of trucks were mobilized. Within days, over 6,000 were rolling across France. Within a week, there were more than 23,000 trucks moving day and night, delivering over 12,000 tons of supplies every single day. It became the largest and fastest logistical operation the world had ever seen. But behind this grand operation were men who rarely received any glory. Over 75% of Red Ball Express drivers were African American soldiers, young men from towns and farms across America, many of whom had never left their home states before the war. They were part of a segregated army that refused to let them fight alongside white soldiers. The U.S. military of 1944 still practiced racial segregation. Black soldiers were often assigned to support roles: cooks, mechanics, and drivers. But when the Red Ball Express was created, the Army needed men, fast, and it was these African American soldiers who answered the call. They drove for 16, sometimes 20 hours a day. They slept in their trucks, ate cold rations, and repaired engines in the mud. The roads they drove on were bombed out, cratered, and lined with wreckage. Rain turned them into rivers of sludge. German snipers and aircraft often targeted convoys, yet they kept driving. One driver later said, "We didn't have headlights. We just followed the glow of the truck in front of us. Sometimes the only light was from burning villages. Every truck carried its life in its cargo. One might be full of ammunition, another with gasoline, a rolling bomb if hit by a shell. Many trucks had names painted on them. May God be with us, keep 'em rollin', Hitler's nightmare. They became moving symbols of endurance. Fuel drums, artillery shells, rations. It all had to move forward, every hour, every day. A single missed delivery could stall an entire division. If Patton's tanks ran out of gas, the offensive stopped. If the artillery lacked shells, the Germans would counterattack. The Red Ball Express was the artery that kept the Allied heart beating. The danger wasn't just from the enemy. The trucks themselves were dangerous, overloaded, poorly maintained, driven through rain and mud at breakneck speeds. Many drivers had learned to drive only weeks before. They were barely trained, barely rested, but absolutely determined. They drove 2.5-ton GMC trucks nicknamed Deuce and a Halfs. These machines became legends. Day and night they climbed the steep hills of Normandy, crossed hastily built bridges, and dodged bomb craters. Sometimes convoys stretched for 100 miles. If one truck broke down, it could block the entire line. The drivers had to make quick decisions, repair it fast or push it off the road. Some trucks were abandoned and later found burned or wrecked. Others simply disappeared in the chaos of war. But the drivers kept moving. They ate when they could, smoked to stay awake, and told jokes to forget the fear. Some sang gospel songs while driving through the night. For many of them, the Red Ball Express wasn't just a mission, it was a statement. They were proving that they could do the job, that they were as capable and as brave as any soldier in the war. By mid-September 1944, the results were astonishing. The Red Ball Express was delivering supplies at a rate that stunned even Eisenhower's staff. Over 400,000 tons of supplies were moved in just a few months. Thanks to them, Patton's Third Army broke through German defenses and liberated Paris on August 25th. His tanks reached the River Seine. The Allied armies were rolling again. General Patton himself said, "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks have to have gas." And the Red Ball Express made sure they did. Even German officers noticed. After the war, one German general remarked, "We were not defeated by American tanks or planes. We were defeated by American trucks." But the cost was immense. The drivers lived under constant stress and exhaustion. Many were killed in crashes, ambushes, or accidents caused by fatigue. They were not awarded medals or parades. Their work was behind the scenes, invisible, yet essential. By November 1944, as new supply lines were built and railroads repaired, the Red Ball Express was shut down. It had done its job. The Allied forces were now deep in Europe, moving toward Germany. But for the men who drove those trucks, the memories never faded. They returned home after the war to a country still divided by color. Many of them hoped their service would change how America saw them. They had fought for freedom abroad, but when they came home, they faced segregation again. Still, their legacy endured. In the years that followed, historians began to recognize the Red Ball Express as one of the most critical logistical operations in military history. Without it, the Allies might not have reached Germany before winter. Without it, the war might have dragged into 1946. It was more than trucks and fuel. It was a story of courage, unity, and silent sacrifice. The Red Ball Express showed the world that wars aren't just won by the men on the front lines. They're won by those who keep the front lines alive. In muddy boots and diesel-stained uniforms, these men built the invisible road to victory. They showed that determination can outrun prejudice, that courage can exist even in the most thankless of jobs. Many of the drivers were teenagers when they started, 19, 20, barely adults. But they carried the weight of an army. In later years, veterans would gather and tell their stories. They remembered the sleepless nights, the laughter, the fear, and the pride of knowing that their work mattered. Some wept when they spoke of the convoys stretching into the horizon, each truck glowing faintly in the dark like a moving constellation. They had no medals, no fame, but they had something greater, the knowledge that without them, the Allies might never have won. One veteran said, "We weren't fighting with guns. We were fighting with wheels, and that's what the Red Ball Express was, an army on wheels, a roaring, rolling miracle that kept the flame of victory burning." When history talks about World War II, it often mentions the great generals, Eisenhower, Patton, Montgomery. It celebrates the great battles, Normandy, the Bulge, Berlin. But between those victories lies the heartbeat of the war, the endless roads, the diesel engines, the men who refused to stop. They proved that wars are not only fought with strategy and strength, but with endurance and will. The Red Ball Express is a reminder that every victory depends on the unseen hands that make it possible. The cooks, the engineers, the mechanics, and yes, the drivers. They didn't make headlines. They made history. The Red Ball Express ended in November 1944. But its legacy lived on in every modern military supply chain, in every convoy that keeps armies moving. The techniques and systems it created became the foundation of modern logistics. More importantly, it helped spark a change in the U.S. military itself. The bravery and efficiency of African American drivers during the Red Ball Express forced the Army to confront its own racism. It laid the groundwork for President Truman's order in 1948 to desegregate the armed forces. In that sense, the Red Ball Express didn't just carry fuel for tanks. It carried the seeds of equality. Today, few remember their names, but every victory that rolled through Europe in 1944 carried their fingerprints. The story of the Red Ball Express is the story of ordinary men doing extraordinary things. Not for medals, not for fame, but because someone had to do it. They kept driving through the darkness, guided only by faith and the faint glow of the road ahead. They were tired, they were scared, but they never stopped, because they knew if they stopped, the war would stop too. And that's how the Allies won. 1 mile at a time, 1 truck at a time. They were the lifeline of victory. They were the Red Ball Express.